She didn't know she was being watched. She didn't know that for 6 weeks, a team of professionals had been studying every corner of her life. Her bank statements, her hospital shifts, her grandmother's medical charts. Before a single word was ever spoken to her, she thought the worst thing that could happen to her had already happened. She was wrong. The moment Nia Monroe opened that envelope, her life stopped belonging to her. Because the man who sent it didn't make requests. Kang Min-jae made calculations. And he had already decided she had no other choice. If this is your first time here, welcome. Drop your city in the comments below so I can see how far this story has traveled. Hit that like button and follow along because you do not want to miss where this goes. The envelope had no return address. That was the first thing Nia noticed. No name, no stamp, nothing on the outside except her full name, typed in clean black letters. Nia Charlotte Monroe. Not her nickname. Not the name she put on job applications or wrote on coffee cups for coworkers. Her full legal name, the one that existed only on documents she rarely pulled out of the drawer beneath her bed. She almost didn't open it. She got home that night after a 12-hour shift smelling like antiseptic and recycled air, with a bruise forming along the inside of her left wrist where the medication cart had rolled into her in the hallway. She was $34 away from an overdraft fee, and she had already eaten the same rice and canned beans 3 times that week. An envelope with no return address wasn't even in the top 5 of things she had energy to deal with, but she opened it anyway. Maybe because her hands were already moving. Maybe because some part of her knew. Inside was a single card. Thick paper, the kind that cost money. And printed on it in the same clean black type. Your grandmother's name has been selected for a conversation with our client. A representative will contact you at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Please be available. No signature. No company name. Nia read it twice. Then she set it down on the kitchen counter and stood there for a long moment, staring at nothing, while the refrigerator hummed its stupid, tired hum. She thought about Grandma Bet lying in room 412 at Crescent General, down the hall from where Nia worked, connected to a dialysis machine 3 times a week, and waiting on a transplant list that moved like it was operated by people who genuinely did not care whether she lived or died. She thought about the stack of bills in that same drawer under her bed. The one from September. The one from August before that. The one from last spring that she had tried to dispute and failed, and then just put at the bottom of the pile because looking at it made her sick. She picked up the card again. Read it a 3rd time. Selected for a conversation. As if her grandmother was a lottery number. She almost threw it away. She did not throw it away. At exactly 9:02. The next morning, Nia had been awake since 6, sitting at the kitchen table in her scrubs, watching the clock like it owed her something. Her phone rang. The number was blocked. Miss Monroe. The voice was male, professional, the kind of flat neutral that people spent years practicing. My name is Attorney Daniel Lim. I represent a private client who has a business proposition for you. Do you have a few minutes? Depends on what it is, Nia said. A brief pause. Not surprised. Just recalibrating. My client is prepared to cover the full cost of your grandmother's treatment. Dialysis. The transplant procedure when a match becomes available. Post-operative care and all associated medications for a minimum of 2 years. In addition, a lump sum payment of $1.2 million will be placed in an account in your name upon signing. Nia's jaw tightened. What does your client want? A legal marriage, a minimum of 6 months. You would be required to act as a genuine spouse in all public settings, reside at my client's estate, and maintain absolute confidentiality about the nature of the arrangement. At the end of the agreed term, a quiet, uncontested divorce will be filed, and all financial obligations to you will have been fulfilled. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside her window, a car horn went off twice and then stopped. Who is your client? Nia said. Another brief pause. His name is Kang Min-jae. He is a businessman and private investor based in... I know who Kang Min-jae is. She said it quietly. Because she did. Everyone in the world who read news from Asia over the past decade knew at least the public version of that name. The legitimate version. The financial empire version. The Min-jae, who appeared on the covers of international business publications in perfectly cut suits with an expression that communicated clearly and without words that he considered being photographed a minor indignity he permitted only because it occasionally served a purpose. She also knew the other version, the one whispered about in darker places, the one that connected his name to organizations whose operations had never been proven in any court, but had never been seriously disputed either. "Ms. Monroe, I need 24 hours, she said. "Of course. I'll contact you tomorrow at the same time." She hung up, pressed the phone against her mouth, breathed. She did not think about the money first. She thought about Bet, about the way her grandmother's hands looked now. The skin loose and papery, the knuckles swollen, the way she held them in her lap when she thought no one was watching because she didn't want anyone to see how much they hurt. About the conversation 2 weeks ago when the doctor had pulled Nia aside and told her carefully that without the transplant they were looking at a timeline. He had not said how long. He didn't need to. Nia had worked in that hospital long enough to know what a doctor's careful voice meant. She thought about what she would do if her grandmother died while she was standing 12 feet away, unable to pay for the one thing that could have saved her. Then finally, she thought about the money. She spent her 24 hours doing the kinds of things that made her stomach hurt. She dug up every piece of public information she could find on Minjae's legal entities. She called her friend Tamara, who worked in medical billing and understood the labyrinth of transplant funding in a way that Nia, for all her years working in hospitals, never fully had. She sat with Grandma Bet that evening and held her hand and said nothing about the phone call because there was nothing to say until she knew what she was going to do. "You look tired, baby," Bet said. "I'm always tired, Grandma." "Different kind of tired tonight." Bet turned her head on the pillow and looked at Nia with the same dark, sharp eyes that had seen everything in 81 years and been softened by very little of it. "Something's on your mind." "Nothing I can't handle." Bet made the sound she made when she disagreed with something but was choosing not to argue. A short exhale through her nose. "You've been trying to handle everything by yourself since you were 9 years old, Nia. That's not strength. That's just habit." Nia looked at the IV line running into her grandmother's arm, at the number on the monitor beside the bed, at the window beyond, where the city went on without concern, lit up and indifferent in the November dark. "I'll figure it out," she said. That night she went home and sat at the kitchen table again and wrote 3 columns on a piece of paper. Pro. Con questions. She filled the first 2 until the paper was dense with her handwriting, small and cramped the way it always got when she was thinking hard. The 3rd column stayed almost empty, because the real question, the only one that actually mattered, wasn't something she could put on a list. What kind of woman agrees to this? She knew the answer. The kind who has no other options. The kind who has spent 7 years working a job that paid $31 an hour while accumulating debt that grew faster than she could pay it down. Trying to keep one woman alive in a system that was not designed for people like either of them to survive in. The kind who is 26 years old and already knows what it feels like to be completely alone in a crisis and have to keep smiling anyway because the patients need her to. She called Attorney Lim at 8:58 the next morning. "I have conditions," she said. 3 days later, a black car arrived at her building at 7 in the morning. Not a sedan. An SUV with tinted windows and a driver who got out to open the door for her and said nothing beyond a polite nod when she climbed in. There were 2 other men in the vehicle, both large, both wearing suits that didn't quite hide the shape of the holsters under their jackets. Nia put her bag on her lap and looked out the window and focused on breathing evenly. The CO estate was 90 minutes outside the city. She watched the urban sprawl thin out through the tinted glass. Apartment towers giving way to commercial lots giving way to highway eventually narrowing into roads she had never driven. The estate revealed itself gradually, first as a set of iron gates set into a stone wall that stretched further in both directions than she could see from the car, then as a long private drive lined with old trees, and then finally as the main house itself, emerging from behind its own landscape like something that had always been there and simply chosen when to be visible. It was not what she expected. She had expected something showier, something that announced itself. The SEO estate was large and severe and utterly sure of itself in the way that only very old wealth could be, not because it was trying to impress anyone, but because impressing people had never been the point. The stone was dark, the windows were tall, the gardens surrounding it had been maintained with a precision that felt military. A woman met her at the door. Mid-40s, Korean, with close-cropped hair and the brisk efficiency of someone who had been managing complicated situations since before Nia was born. "I'm Park Soo-jin," the woman said, head of household staff. I'll take you through the orientation, and then Mr. Kong will see you in the study. She said it the way people said things when the schedule had already been set, and they were simply informing you of facts. Orientation, Naya said. The household has 47 staff members across residential, security, and operational functions. There are 22 rooms in the main building and a separate staff wing. You'll have your own suite on the second floor. Mr. Kang's private quarters are on the same floor but the east end. You will be expected to take meals together in the formal dining room when Mr. Kang is in residence and to attend all estate functions as his wife. Attorney Lim has forwarded your signed agreement to my office. Is he always like this? Nia said. The scheduling, the briefing, like it's a corporate onboarding. Park Soo-jin looked at her for a moment with an expression that was not quite amusement but was in the neighborhood of it. Yes, she said. He is. The study was at the far end of the east wing, past a hallway lined with framed documents that Nia didn't stop to read, and a pair of double doors that stood open when she arrived. She heard the chair before she saw him. A motorized hum, faint but distinct, and then Kang Min-jae came around the edge of the bookshelf in a dark, narrow-framed power wheelchair, moving with the precise control of someone who had learned the machine thoroughly and refused to be anything less than expert at it. He stopped when he reached the center of the room, looked at her. She had seen photographs. The photographs had not done the full job. He was tall, even seated, or at least he gave that impression, the way he held himself, spine straight, shoulders set, no concession at all in his posture to the chair beneath him. His face was angular and severe and would have been considered classically handsome if it had worn any expression at all, which it currently did not. He wore a dark shirt, no tie. His hands were resting on the armrests with the particular stillness of someone who had learned to be careful about what their body communicated. He looked at her the way someone looks at a problem they have already solved and are now confirming the solution for. "Miss Monroe," he said. His English was excellent. Minimal accent, precise diction. "Mr. Kong," she said, "sit down." She didn't sit down immediately. She looked around the room first. The desk, the bookshelves, the window behind him overlooking the east garden. And then she sat in the chair across from his position and folded her hands in her lap and looked back at him. Something shifted in his eyes. Very small. Gone before she could name it. "Attorney Lim has briefed you on the terms," he said. "He has. Do you have questions?" "Several." She pulled a small notepad from her bag. She had written them down because she was the kind of person who wrote things down, and she didn't care if that looked strange. "The medical arrangement for my grandmother, I want the treatment funded through a third-party medical trust, not an account that you control directly. I want the transplant included regardless of whether a match is found before or after the 6 months ends. I want my employment at Crescent General protected. I'll need flex scheduling, which you'll have to arrange without explaining why, because I am not going to tell my employer I'm doing this." Min-jae's expression did not change. Agreed, and that last point has already been arranged." She looked up from her notepad. "What do you mean it's been arranged?" "A significant donation was made to Crescent General's operating fund 2 weeks ago. Your department director has been informed that the funding is contingent on staff flexibility accommodations for certain named personnel. Your name is among them." A pause. It was easier than the alternative. Nia felt the hair on the back of her arms stand up. Not quite fear. Something adjacent to it. The sensation of realizing that a conversation she thought she was having for the first time had actually been going on without her for much longer. "You did that before I agreed," she said. "Before you called, yes." "That's—" She stopped. "Efficient," he said. "I was going to say something else." "I know what you were going to say." He turned the chair slightly, repositioning to face her more directly. "I researched you, Ms. Monroe, thoroughly. Your finances, your work history, your grandmother's medical status, your academic record. I do not enter agreements without complete information. That is not something I apologize for. You could have just told me that up front. Attorney Lim was instructed to disclose that you had been specifically selected based on a profile review. The word selected was deliberate. There's a difference between selected and investigated." "Yes," he said. "There is." And that was all he said about it. Nia stared at him for a moment. Thought about walking out. Calculated, with the particular cold precision that poverty had taught her, exactly what she would be walking out of and why, and what Grandma Bet's face would look like when Nia came back to the hospital tomorrow, having turned down the one thing that could save her. "What do you need from me?" she said. Her voice was flat. Not angry, not accommodating, just direct. Min-jae's chin lifted slightly. "In public and in the presence of associates, you will conduct yourself as my wife. Meals, events, meetings where a spouse's presence is expected. You will not contradict me on matters of business in front of others. You will not discuss the nature of this arrangement with anyone. And here? In this house? Here you may conduct yourself however you like. You have your own suite, your own schedule within the constraints of estate security. Staff will accommodate your needs. You are not required to spend time with me beyond what the social calendar demands." "What's wrong with you?" She said it bluntly, the way she'd learned to say difficult things in hospital settings. Not to wound, but because imprecision wasted time. Min-jae was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. "Spinal cord injury, 6 months ago. Partial paralysis from a level 3 lumbar injury, with incomplete damage at the cervical segments. Prognosis for full recovery is disputed, depending on which physician you consult." "What do your physicians say?" "They're cautious." "What does your body say?" The 2-second pause again, a longer version this time. "It says things I find inconvenient to repeat in first meetings." Nia nodded slowly. "Okay." She put her notepad back in her bag. "I need one more thing." "Name it." "I want to visit my grandmother every week, minimum. Not every other week, not when the schedule allows. Every week alone, without an escort inside the facility." Min-jae looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Agreed." "All right," she said. She stood up, extended her hand. He looked at it for a moment that stretched slightly past comfortable. Then he reached up and shook it. His grip was firm and dry and brief, and told her absolutely nothing except that he had shaken hands with a great many people in his life and had learned to give nothing away in the doing of it. "Welcome to the estate, Ms. Monroe," he said. Not warmly, not coldly, just factually. "I'll need a week to get my things," she said. "Your room will be ready." She did not tell Grandma Bet what the arrangement was. She told her only that she had found a way to cover the treatment costs and the transplant, that she would be staying somewhere else for a while but would visit every week, and that Bet should not ask questions that Nia couldn't answer honestly. Betta had looked at her for a long time with those sharp old eyes. "Baby," she said finally, "what did you do?" "Something practical," Nia said. "That's not an answer." "I know." Bet pressed her lips together, reached out and gripped Nia's hand with both of hers, the swollen knuckles and all. "You better come back whole," she said. "Whatever this is, you better come back from it whole, you hear me?" "I'll be fine, Grandma." "That's not what I said." Nia felt the thing behind her eyes that she refused to let become tears. She squeezed her grandmother's hands back. "I hear you," she said. Moving into the CO estate took one afternoon. She had less than she'd thought, which was its own specific kind of humiliation when she stood in the middle of the suite they gave her, larger than her entire apartment, with a view of the garden and a bathroom with marble floors and a closet that was bigger than her old bedroom, and watched the staff member set her 2 bags down near the dresser. "Shall I unpack for you?" the young woman asked. Her name tag said Jisoo. "No," Nia said. "Thank you. I'll do it." She unpacked alone, folded her second-hand scrubs and her 2 good blouses and the one dress she owned that wasn't meant for funerals, and placed them in the enormous closet where they occupied approximately 8% of the available space, and looked objectively slightly sad about it. She stood at the window for a long time that first evening, looking at the garden below, the manicured hedges and the stone paths and the lit fountain at the center that ran even in November for reasons she couldn't fathom. The estate was quiet in the way expensive places were quiet. Not the absence of noise, but the deliberate management of it. She thought, "I made this choice. Own it." She thought, "Bet is going to live. That's what matters." She thought, "Who is the man on the other side of this hallway, and what exactly am I walking into?" The first full week was a lesson in structured awkwardness. They ate breakfast at 8 and dinner at 7. Min-jae sat at the head of the table, Nia at the adjacent seat to his right, because Park Soo-jin had explained without elaborating that the foot of the table was for guests, and the right side was traditional for the spouse. The first morning they ate in near silence, and Nia ate all of her food because she was hungry and because she was not the kind of person who picked at meals to signal anything. Min-jae ate with the focused efficiency of someone who treated nutrition as maintenance rather than pleasure. On the second morning, she asked him what he was reading. He was holding a tablet at an angle that prevented her from seeing the screen. He looked up. Market projections for the fourth quarter. At breakfast. Is there a better time? Most people at breakfast aren't doing work. Most people don't have what I have to manage. Is that self-pity or just a fact? He set the tablet down, looked at her with an expression she was beginning to understand as genuine consideration, not offense, not dismissal, but the specific expression of a person who is not accustomed to being asked direct questions and is deciding whether to engage with the one in front of him. Fact, he said. Okay, she said, and went back to her eggs. On the third morning, she got up at 6 and went for a walk in the garden, because she had always needed movement in the morning, and the estate was the kind of place that had room for it. When she came back through the east wing hallway, she passed Min-jae's door and heard, faintly but unmistakably, the sound of controlled physical exertion, the rhythmic effort of someone working against resistance, and then a pause, and then the sound of something hitting the floor, and a single sharp exhale that was not quite a word but was not quite nothing either. She stopped in the hallway, stood there for a moment, kept walking. At breakfast, he arrived 7 minutes later than usual. His jaw was set in a way it hadn't been on previous mornings. There was a small tension in his left shoulder that hadn't been there before. He sat down and poured his coffee and said nothing, and she said nothing, and they ate. After about 5 minutes, she said, "Is your physical therapy in the mornings?" He was quiet. "I work in a hospital," she said. Not as an explanation, just as context. "I'm aware of that. I know what a spinal injury recovery looks like. Not perfectly, but enough." "I'm not your patient, Miss Monroe." "I know." She turned her coffee cup in her hands. "I'm not trying to make you one. I'm just saying I'm going to notice things. It's not something I can turn off." He looked at her for a moment with an expression that was difficult to read, something behind the control, something that had been pressed flat for a long time. "Then notice them quietly," he said. "That's the plan," she said. "Oh." By the end of the first week, they had developed the skeletal framework of a coexistence. Not comfort, nothing so soft as that, but a mutual understanding of where the edges were. Min-jae's edges were clear and consistent. He did not discuss the injury with any detail. He did not allow anyone into his physical therapy sessions. He managed every interaction as if it were a negotiation that he intended to win. Nia's edges were different. She pushed back when pushed. She did not perform deference she didn't feel. And she had a particular silence she used when she was making a decision that felt like the absence of sound, but was actually active. He noticed her silence. She could tell by the way he tracked it. On Friday afternoon, Park Soo-jin knocked on Nia's suite door to inform her that there would be a dinner the following evening with 3 of Min-jae's senior associates and their partners, and that it was the first of several such occasions Nia would be expected to attend in the role of spouse. "What should I know about them?" Nia asked. Soo-jin gave her a precise, efficient briefing on all 3 couples, names, positions, temperaments, the specific social dynamics of each, who was loyal and who was performing loyalty, which wives were shrewd and which were merely decorative. It was a briefing so thorough and so casually delivered that Nia felt a brief vertigo at the realization that this woman had spent years navigating the exact ecosystem she was about to step into. "Is there anything I should avoid saying?" Nia said. "Don't ask about the attack," Soo-jin said. "Not from them, not to them, not in the room where they might hear. Don't express surprise at anything. If you don't know something, you don't know it because it's not relevant to you, not because you're new. And if anyone asks how you and Mr. Kong met, what's the story? You met through a mutual acquaintance in New York 18 months ago. You were working a medical conference. He was attending a side meeting in the same building. You kept in touch. He proposed in the spring." Nia repeated it back without notes. Soo-jin nodded. "One more thing," Nia said. "What do I wear?" Soo-jin opened the suite's secondary closet, the one Nia hadn't touched because she hadn't known what it was for, to reveal a row of garments on wooden hangers, all in her size, all precisely the kind of thing that a man with unlimited resources and a specific visual strategy for his household would have selected. Nia looked at them for a long moment. "He picked these," she said. "A stylist did, based on his preferences." "Right. She ran her finger along the sleeve of a deep burgundy dress. Of course. The dinner was the first time she understood the full weight of what she had agreed to. She understood it not from the tension of performing a lie. She was better at that than she'd expected. Her hospital face turned out to be good training for maintaining composure under examination. But from watching Min Jae in the room with his associates, he was a different person, not a warmer one, not a more relaxed one, but he occupied space differently. There was a weight in the room when he spoke that didn't come from volume or aggression, but from something older and more fundamental, the specific gravity of a person who had spent years making decisions that other people lived or died by. His associates listened to him the way people listened when they understood the cost of inattention. They laughed at the right moments and deferred at the right moments, and Nia watched the whole ecosystem and understood, clearly and without sentimentality, that the man she was eating breakfast with in strained silence every morning was not a businessman who happened to have dangerous connections. I was the danger. Everything else was the connection. Across the table, one of the wives, pretty, measured, wearing a smile that had been calibrated to reveal nothing, looked at Nia with the particular assessment of a woman who has learned that other women in this world are either allies or threats, and who has not yet decided which category to put her in. "You're a nurse?" the woman said. Her name was Yuna. Her husband was Min Jae's financial director. "Nursing assistant," Nia said, "working toward my RN." "How did you and Min Jae?" Yuna began. "Medical conference," Nia said. 2 years ago. He was the most inconvenient man in any room I'd ever been in." She said it with a slight smile, warm enough to read as genuine, sharp enough to pass as real affection. From the head of the table, without looking at her, Min Jae said, "She's being generous." Low laughter around the table, a small crack of something that might have been relief passing around the room. Yuna looked between them, relaxed fractionally. "He's always been impossible," she said, in the tone of a woman sharing an old complaint fondly. "I know," Nia said. "I married him anyway." Later, when the guests were gone and Nia was sitting at the edge of her bed, still in the burgundy dress, processing the evening, there was a knock at her door. Min Jae. He had his jacket off and his collar open. Still in the wheelchair, but the formal rigidity of the dinner had loosened slightly, the way a face relaxes when it stops performing. "You did well," he said. She looked at him. "You sound surprised." "I was cautious." "You're always cautious." She pulled one of the long earrings out and set it on the nightstand. "For what it's worth, you're good at it too. The room. Holding the room like that." Something passed through his face. Not pride. Something older than pride. "It used to be easier," he said. She didn't ask what he meant. She knew. He meant before the chair, before the attack, before the body that had stopped following orders. "Good night, Mr. Kang," she said. He looked at her for one more moment. "Min Jae," he said. "In the house, at minimum. We sound like strangers." "We are strangers," she said. "We're married," he said. Those aren't the same thing." He turned the chair and left without answering, and she sat in the quiet with the other earring still in her hand, listening to the sound of the motorized chair disappear down the hallway, and thought about the look on his face when he'd said it used to be easier, the thing behind his eyes that he hadn't meant to let her see. She filed it away. The way she filed everything. The way you filed things when you knew they would matter later. The second week brought the first real crack. It was a Tuesday, early morning, and she was in the east corridor heading to the kitchen when she heard it. Not the controlled effort sounds from the week before, but something rawer. Through the half-open door of the gym at the end of the hall, she saw Min Jae in the parallel bars, a physical therapist named Dr. Park on one side of him, standing back. Min Jae's knuckles were white on the bars. His jaw was clenched. He was trying to move his left leg, and the leg was not cooperating with anything like the intention behind it. And the sound he made when it gave out entirely, when his grip on the bar was the only thing keeping him upright, and he hung there for a long, terrible moment, was not the sound of a man accepting a limitation. It was the sound of a man who had spent his entire life refusing to accept limitations, finding one he could not argue with. Nia stopped. She was standing in the doorway, and she knew she should move. She did not move. Min Jae's head lifted, and his eyes found her in the doorway. And for the first time since she had arrived at the CO estate, she saw his face entirely unguarded, raw, exhausted, furious, and humiliated in the specific way of someone who is only humiliated by being seen. The space between them held for 3 seconds. Then his face closed again, shutting down in layers, and he said to Dr. Park, "Leave." Nia started to take a step back. "Not you," he said. His voice was rough at the edges, in a way it had never been at the breakfast table. She stepped into the room. Dr. Park gathered his notes and left, pulling the door most of the way closed behind him. Minji released the bar with his left hand, gripped it again. The knuckles went white again. "You weren't supposed to see that," he said. "I know. I don't want your—" He stopped. "I wasn't going to offer anything," she said. "I just came to tell you that breakfast is in 20 minutes, and Park Soo-jin asked me to let you know a call came in from your attorney, and it needs to be returned before noon." The bar creaked slightly from the pressure of his grip. "Min Jae," she said, and it was the first time she'd used his name, and she heard it register in the slight change in his breathing. "Breakfast, 20 minutes." She left. She didn't look back, and she didn't say anything else, because she knew. The way she knew how to read a room, and read a chart, and read the specific exhaustion in a patient's face. That saying anything else would have been the wrong thing entirely. Some people needed witnesses. Some people needed to not be witnesses to themselves. Min Jae was the second kind. He came to breakfast that morning, 22 minutes after she'd left him in the gym. He sat down across from his position and poured his coffee, and ate his food and said nothing about the gym, and Nia said nothing about the gym, and they sat in their usual silence. But the silence was different that morning. The texture of it had changed. Halfway through breakfast, he said, without looking up from his plate, "The wedding is in 3 weeks." "I know," she said. "It will be a formal ceremony, 60 guests, associates, family representatives, a few members of the press who will be controlled." "Controlled how?" "They'll photograph what they're told to photograph and publish what they're told to publish." She absorbed this without comment. "Am I allowed to have anyone there, on my side?" He looked up. It seemed to occur to him, genuinely, that this was something he had not considered. "Who would you want?" "My friend Tamara, and I want Bet there, if she's stable enough." His expression was careful. "Your grandmother's presence would complicate security arrangements." "She raised me alone from when I was 9 years old," Nia said. "She's the only family I have. I don't care about complicated." Min Jae looked at her for a long moment, the same careful expression. And then he said simply, "I'll have the medical team assess her transport safety and arrange what's needed." Nia put her fork down for a moment. Not because she was done eating, because she needed to feel something without having it show on her face. "Thank you," she said, quietly. Not performing gratitude, just having it. He looked away first. "Don't thank me," he said. "It's within the parameters of the arrangement." She picked up her fork. "Sure," she said. They ate the rest of breakfast in their usual silence, which was, she noticed, becoming less and less like silence and more like something else. Something she didn't have a word for yet. Something that was building in the space between their breakfasts and their careful distances and the things they noticed about each other that neither of them had agreed to notice. She thought, 6 months. You can do anything for 6 months. She thought, be careful. She thought, he said don't thank him like he already knew you meant it. 3 weeks until the wedding, 60 guests. A ceremony that was not real and a ring she would wear anyway. And a man who controlled empires from a wheelchair and whose face had been completely unguarded for exactly 3 seconds in a gym hallway at 7 in the morning, and she was the only person in the building who had seen it. She was going to have to be very, very careful. But somewhere beneath the calculation, beneath the practical column of reasons and the cold math of survival, something else had shifted, something small and quiet, and not yet named, the way a fault line is invisible until the moment it moves. And it had already started moving. The fault line had started moving, and neither of them acknowledged it, which was the most dangerous thing of all. The 2 weeks leading up to the wedding had a particular texture, tightly managed on the surface, building pressure underneath, the way weather builds before a storm that hasn't decided yet whether it wants to arrive. They ate breakfast at 8, they ate dinner at 7, they passed in hallways and exchanged the minimal necessary words, and maintained the careful architecture of 2 people honoring the edges they'd established in that first conversation in the study. But the edges were shifting. It started with the therapy sessions. Not that she attended them. He had made that boundary clear and she had respected it without argument, because she understood the specific pride of a person who needed to fail in private. But the sessions happened every morning at 6:30 in the East Wing gym, and Nia was an early riser by years of habit, and the estate's kitchen was at the end of the East Corridor, and she had a particular need for coffee before anything else in the morning. So she walked past the gym door every day, and every day she could hear, through whatever gap existed, the sounds of the work. She learned his rhythms without trying to. The days when the session ran long, those were the hard days when something wasn't cooperating and he pushed anyway instead of stopping. The days when she heard Dr. Park's voice more than usual, low and instructional, those were the adjustment days, recalibrating the approach. And then there were the mornings she heard almost nothing, just effort and the squeak of equipment, and those she understood as the days he was making progress and didn't want anyone to speak and break the concentration. She brought him coffee on the fourth morning of the second week. She did not knock. She opened the door 4 inches, set the cup on the floor just inside the threshold where he would see it when he finished, and left. She did not look in. She did not say anything. At breakfast that morning, he didn't mention it. But when she sat down, her coffee was already poured, which was not something that had happened before. Staff usually waited for her to signal. And she understood that as the only acknowledgement she was going to get, and she decided that was enough. The thing was, and this was the part she had not fully calculated for, the variable she had missed in her 3-column list, Min Jae was not the person she had expected him to be in close quarters. She had expected cold. She had prepared for cold. She had grown up hard enough and worked in enough difficult environments to know how to move through cold without letting it touch her. What she had not prepared for was precise. He was the most precise person she had ever been in a house with. Everything had a reason. Every decision was considered. He was not warm, but he was thorough. When he arranged for Grandma Bet's transport assessment for the wedding, she learned later that he had personally reviewed the medical parameters with the transport team before approving it. When she mentioned once, in passing, that she found the formal dining room table too long for 2 people eating a meal together, he had it adjusted within 24 hours and hadn't said a word about having done it. She noticed. He had to know she noticed. Neither of them brought it up. "You're going to freeze," he said on Thursday morning. She looked up from her coffee. He was looking at her coat, which she was wearing over her scrubs because her shift started at noon, and she was leaving from the estate for the first time in 9 days. "I'll be inside most of the day," she said. "The drive is 90 minutes. The vehicle's heating takes 12 minutes to reach adequate temperature." He turned back to his tablet. "There's a coat in the secondary closet. The gray one. Use it." She opened her mouth. "I'm not being generous," he said without looking up. "I need you functional for the next 3 weeks. You getting sick is inconvenient." She closed her mouth, thought about it for 1 second, went and got the gray coat. It was the most expensive coat she had ever touched. She wore it in the car all the way to Crescent General, with her hands in its pockets and her chin tucked into the collar, and told herself it meant absolutely nothing. Well, she told Grandma Bet almost nothing. She told her the apartment was big and clean and the food was good, and the man was complicated but not unkind. Bet listened to all of this with the particular stillness of a woman who has raised children and grandchildren and has heard every variation of "I'm fine" that exists. "He treating you right?" Bet said. "It's not that kind of situation, Grandma." "I didn't ask what kind of situation it is. I asked if he's treating you right." Nia thought about the coffee, the adjusted table, the gray coat still folded over the chair in the corner of the hospital room. "He's treating me correctly," she said. Bet made the exhale through the nose sound. "He's coming to meet you," Nia said. "Before the wedding. He wanted to." That got Bet's attention. Her sharp old eyes settled on Nia's face with full focus. "He wanted to." "That's what he said." Bet looked at the ceiling for a moment. "Bring me my good robe," she said. "Not that hospital thing, the blue one from home." Nia smiled before she could stop it. "I'll bring it next visit." "And fix your face," Bet said. "You got that look you get when you're trying not to feel something. I've been watching you do that since you were 9 years old, and it never worked once." He visited Bet on a Saturday afternoon, 10 days before the wedding. Nia had not been sure he would actually come. She'd half expected him to send Attorney Lim or delegate the visit to Park Soo-jin with a message and flowers. But he came himself. He came in the wheelchair with only one security detail waiting outside the building. And when he entered room 412, he was wearing a dark jacket and no tie, and he had, she noticed, left the tablet behind. Bet looked at him for a long moment from her adjusted bed position. Back straight, blue robe on, the particular dignity of a woman who had decided to meet a thing on her own terms. Then she said, "Sit down over there where I can see you." Minji positioned himself beside the visitor's chair that Nia usually sat in. "You're younger than I expected," Bet said. 32, he said. "And you run, what was it Nia said, financial investments?" "Among other things," he said. Bet looked at him the way she looked at everything, completely and without apology. "You know what I'm going to ask you?" "I imagine several things." "Just one thing. Are you going to take care of my granddaughter?" The room was quiet. The dialysis machine made its slow, rhythmic sound. Minjay looked at Bet Monroe for a long moment with the careful, measuring expression he wore in every negotiation. And then something shifted. Not the shutting down shift. The opening up one. Small. Almost invisible. But Nia was watching. "Yes," he said. "I'm going to take care of her." "She doesn't make it easy," Bet said. "I'm aware." "She doesn't ask for help." "I'm aware of that too." Bet nodded slowly. "Okay," she said. "Then we understand each other." On the way back to the estate, Nia sat in the back seat of the SUV and looked out the tinted window and said nothing for 20 minutes. Minjay sat beside her. They had taken the same vehicle for the first time, the proximity strange in a different way than the estate's proximity, more compressed somehow. And he also said nothing. Then he said, "She's remarkable." Nia pressed her lips together. "Yeah," she said. "She is. She sees everything. Always has." Another silence. "You look like her," he said. Nia turned her head. He was looking forward, at the partition between the passenger compartment and the driver, and his profile gave nothing away. But he had said it. He had said it like it was simply a true thing he had observed and decided to share, which was the first time she had heard him offer something that was not instrumental to any purpose she could identify. "People usually say I look like my mother," she said. "I don't know what your mother looked like," he said. "She died," Nia said. "When I was 9. Car accident. My father 6 months before that. He was sick." The SUV took a long curve. The city's edge came into view on her right. "Both parents," he said quietly. "Both parents. Bet took me in. She was 63. He was quiet for another moment. Then, "My mother died when I was 15. My father 3 years later." She hadn't known that. It wasn't in any of the public information she'd found. "Who raised you?" she asked. "The organization," he said. And the way he said it, flat, precise, without self-pity or drama, told her that this was simply a fact about his life that he had long since finished grieving, or had never been given the framework to grieve in the first place. She turned back to the window. 2 orphans, she thought, different prices, same wound. She did not say that out loud. The wedding dress arrived 4 days before the ceremony. She hadn't been consulted. She opened the garment bag alone in her suite and found it waiting inside. Ivory silk, structured bodice, clean lines, no excessive ornamentation. It fit perfectly. Of course it did. He'd had her measurements from the first week. She sat on the edge of the bed in her regular clothes and looked at the dress hanging on the closet door for a long time. Then she picked up her phone and called Tamara. "Tell me everything," Tamara said, which was how she always answered. "I can't tell you everything." "Then tell me what you can." "It's complicated, doesn't cover it." Nia pressed the heel of her hand against her forehead. "I thought I had a clear picture of what this was. I thought I understood exactly what I was walking into. And now? Now I'm sitting in a room that's bigger than my old apartment, looking at a wedding dress that fits like it was made for me, and thinking about the fact that he went to see my grandmother because he wanted to. Not because it was in the contract, because he wanted to." Tamara was quiet for a moment. "Nia, I know. This man runs—" "I know what he runs, Tamara. You cannot—" "I said I know." Nia's voice came out harder than she intended. She softened it. I'm not doing anything. I'm just telling you what's happening. I needed to say it out loud to someone who isn't him." Tamara let out a long breath on the other end of the line. "Okay," she said finally. "Okay. I hear you." A pause. Does he? "I have no idea what he feels," Nia said. "He's the most controlled person I've ever met. He gives nothing away unless he decides to. But sometimes he decides to." Nia looked at the dress. the ivory silk, the perfect fit. Sometimes, she said. The night before the wedding, she couldn't sleep. She got up at 2 in the morning and went down to the kitchen and made herself a cup of tea she didn't particularly want. And she was standing at the kitchen window looking out at the dark garden when she heard the sound of the chair in the corridor. Min-jae appeared in the kitchen doorway. He was in a plain dark shirt and loose pants, the first time she'd seen him in anything that wasn't immaculate. He looked at her. She looked at him. "Can't sleep," he said. "No?" she said. "You?" "No." He moved to the other counter and filled a glass of water with the particular efficiency that defined every physical action he made. Economy of movement, nothing wasted, every gesture calculated because calculation was the only relationship with his body he could currently guarantee. He drank half of it. "Pre-event tension," he said. "Or you're human," she said. He set the glass down, looked at her. "The ceremony tomorrow." He stopped, started again. "It will be watched very closely by people who will be looking for weakness. You should know that." "I know that already. Some of them are not well-intentioned." "Min-jae." She turned from the window to face him directly. "I've worked double shifts on nights where 2 patients coded within an hour of each other, and I held it together the whole time. I can get through a formal ceremony." He looked at her for a long moment with the full weight of his attention, which was, she had learned, a substantial thing. When he actually looked at you, it was like being under examination by someone who missed nothing and forgot less. "I know you can," he said. And the way he said it was different from every other sentence he'd said in 3 weeks. Not assessing, not managing, just stating something true. The kitchen was very quiet. "Why me?" she said. It came out before she'd decided to ask it. "Out of everyone your team profiled, why me?" He was quiet for long enough that she thought he might not answer. "Because you don't perform," he said. "Everyone in my world performs. It's the core skill of survival in that environment. You perform strength, you perform loyalty, you perform certainty. You never stop. I watched 3 weeks of surveillance footage and you never performed once. When you were tired, you looked tired. When you were angry, you looked angry. When you were afraid," he paused. "You looked afraid and kept moving anyway." Nia held very still. "I needed someone who wouldn't break under that kind of environment," he said. "And I needed someone who wouldn't be bought by it. Those 2 things almost never exist in the same person." The refrigerator hummed. Outside the window, the garden was dark and the fountain was off for the night. "That's a very analytical reason for a marriage," she said. Her voice was steady. "It started as an analysis," he said, "that landed somewhere in her chest, and she felt it land, and she kept her face composed because she had learned his language, the language of a person who communicated in implication and fractional gesture and the things left deliberately unsaid. It started as an analysis." She turned back to the window. "Get some sleep," she said. "Big day." She heard him pause. She heard the slight movement of the chair. She heard him leave. She stood at the window for another 20 minutes, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had gone cold, her heart doing something she absolutely refused to name. The morning of the wedding arrived gray and sharp, the sky the color of unpolished steel, and Nia dressed with Tamara talking steady nonsense in her ear. The kind of nonsense that wasn't nonsense at all, but the particular warmth of a person who loved you making sound to fill the space where fear lived. "You look incredible," Tamara said, stepping back from the final adjustment to Nia's hair. Her eyes were doing the thing. The shining thing. "You actually look like—" "Don't cry," Nia said. "I'm not crying." "You're about to." "I'm not." Tamara pressed her lips together. "Okay, I'm a little bit. You look like someone who's about to walk into something big." "That's what I'm doing," Nia said. In the mirror, she looked like a stranger. The ivory dress, the hair up, the borrowed earrings, something Sujin had produced from Min-jae's mother's jewelry, which Nia had accepted without comment because there was nothing to say about it that wouldn't cost her composure. She looked like a woman about to get married. She looked like a woman who had made a decision and was now standing inside it. She looked at herself for one long, level moment. "Own it," she thought. "You made this choice." The procession to the ceremony room was the longest walk she had taken in the estate, through the formal wing and into the great hall where 60 chairs were set in precise rows and 60 people sat in them, People she mostly didn't know, and several she recognized from briefings, and all of whom turned to watch her enter. Tamara squeezed her hand at the door and let go. She walked down the aisle alone, which had not been discussed, and she had simply assumed there was no one to give her away, no father, no substitute. Just her, in ivory silk, walking toward the man at the end of the aisle. She saw him before he turned around. She saw the set of his shoulders, the absolute precision of his posture. She saw the chair facing the officiant, and she began to close the distance between them, and then Min-jae's hands moved to the chair's armrests. She understood what was happening before it finished happening. She watched him push, watched the impossible effort in his arms and shoulders, and the single terrible second where his legs found some partial purchase that the doctors had said was unlikely to hold, and then he was standing, upright, on his feet, both hands still gripping the armrests of the chair behind him for balance, but standing, facing her. The room was completely silent. I was shaking. She could see it from 4 feet away when she reached him. The fine, controlled tremor of a man holding something that his body had decided it could barely afford to hold. His jaw was locked. His face was stripped of every layer of composure except the last one, the one underneath everything, the one that was just Min-jae. He looked at her the way she had seen him look at nothing and no one since she arrived. She reached out and took his arm. Not ceremonially, just took it, steady. Her hand on his forearm, her fingers over his sleeve, and she felt the tremor through the fabric and she held on. "You didn't have to," she said, low enough for only him. "Yes, I did," he said, and his voice was rough and absolutely certain. The ceremony began. Nia stood beside him, her hand on his arm the entire time, and when the vows came she said them and meant the surface of them and felt something complicated and heavy moving beneath the surface that she was not prepared to examine. Not here, not in front of 60 people, not with his arm under her hand and his voice saying the same words back to her with the particular weight of a man who had never said anything he didn't mean. The ring was white gold. It fit exactly. When the officiant pronounced them married, the room exhaled. 60 people releasing 60 held breaths. And Nia looked at the man beside her who was still standing, still shaking, still refusing to sit down, and understood that she was in serious trouble. Not the dangerous kind. The other kind. The kind you don't see coming because you're busy doing the math, and the math looked right, and then something happened that wasn't in any column, and now the entire calculation was wrong, and you were standing in ivory silk with a white gold ring on your finger, realizing that the contract had been signed in the office 3 weeks ago, but something else entirely had just been signed here, witnessed by 60 people, and she had no idea how to get it back. She was still holding his arm when he finally, carefully, sat back down, and she felt the way his exhale changed when the weight left his legs, the relief and the cost of it at the same time. And she thought, Bet was right. I've been trying to handle everything since I was 9 years old, and I am very, very bad at, and she was very, very bad at not feeling things she had decided not to feel. The reception was held in the estate's formal ballroom, a room Nia had walked past a dozen times and never entered, its double doors kept closed. The way rooms are kept closed when they're being saved for something. Now the doors were open and the room was full of candlelight and cut crystal and 60 people performing the social rituals of celebrating a marriage that most of them understood, at some level, was a transaction. They were good at the performance. They had been doing it their whole lives. Nia moved through the reception the way she moved through difficult shifts, present in each moment, fully functional, and storing everything else in a compartment she would deal with later. She talked to Yuna again, who was warmer this time, less calculating, or doing a better job of hiding the calculation. She talked to 2 of Min-jae's attorneys and a financial director whose name she immediately forgot, and a woman named Cho, who ran something in Singapore that was never quite specified, and who looked at Nia with the frank appraisal of someone deciding whether an acquisition was worth what was paid for it. She smiled. She answered questions. She said he and us in the right places without hesitating. Min-jae stayed at her peripheral for most of the evening, close enough to read as a couple, far enough to give her room. She felt him before she saw him each time he repositioned, some awareness she had developed over 3 weeks of proximity that she had not asked for and could not explain. When a man she didn't recognize, red-faced and overserved, put his hand on her arm and leaned in with something too familiar in his posture, Min-jae was beside her before the man finished the sentence, and the single look he delivered was so precise and so absolute that the man straightened, excused himself, and relocated across the room. I didn't say anything about it afterward. She didn't either. Later, near 10 o'clock, Grandma Bet was beginning to tire. Nia could read it in the set of her shoulders, the way her hands had moved back to her lap. And she went to sit beside her for a while, and Min Jae appeared on Bet's other side without being asked, and sat with them both in a quiet that felt, to Nia's complete bewilderment, like something she had lived before, like something familiar. Bet looked between them once, said nothing, smiled the small private smile she kept for moments she considered confirmed. Nia looked away from it before it could mean anything. The weeks after the wedding moved differently. There was a before and an after, and they both knew it without discussing it, because they were people who did not discuss the things that were most true. What changed was the ease. Not comfort, still not comfort, still the careful edges and the maintained distances, but a particular ease that replaced the tension of the first weeks. The performance requirement was behind them. The ceremony was done. What remained was simply the living of it, day by day, breakfast to dinner to the long evenings in which the estate settled into its nighttime quiet, and they occasionally found themselves in the same room without planning to be. He started coming to the sitting room in the evenings. She had taken to reading there after dinner. It was the only room in the estate that felt human-scaled to her, with chairs that were worn in the right places and bookshelves that had actual use marks on the spines. She would read for 2 hours and then go to bed, and that was her evening. On the third night after the wedding, he came in with his tablet and sat across from her and worked, and she read, and neither of them said anything about it. It happened again the following night, and the night after that, until it was simply the thing that happened in the evenings. The sitting room became a third kind of space, not the formal dining room's negotiating table, not the hallway's transitional non-space, but somewhere in between, a place where they existed in parallel without agenda. He told her things sometimes. Fragments. The kind of information that wasn't classified but wasn't offered to everyone. The specific frustration of managing 3 simultaneous acquisition disputes across 2 jurisdictions. The way certain members of the board operated, their particular games. She listened and occasionally asked questions, and he answered them fully, which she came to understand was not something he did with many people. She told him things too. The logistical absurdity of hospital administration, the patient she had been thinking about, an elderly man on her ward who had no family contact listed and never got visitors. The particular sadness of watching someone navigate serious illness without anyone to hold their hand. Min Jae listened to that last one for a long moment and then said, "His name." She looked up from her book. "What?" "The patient, his name. I'll see that he gets visitors." "You'll, how?" "I employ 37 people in this city alone whose full function is not currently utilized. 2 of them can visit a man in a hospital once a week." She stared at him. He had already gone back to his tablet. "You can't just assign people to visit someone," she said. "Why not?" "Because it's—" She stopped. Thought about it. Thought about the man alone in the room down the hall from Bet, watching daytime television with the volume too low. "His name is Gerald," she said. "He likes baseball." Min Jae typed something. "Done," he said. She looked at him for one more moment, turned back to her book. Told herself it was just efficiency. Told herself he was just managing a variable. She almost believed it. The rehabilitation sessions changed in the 5th week. She didn't engineer it. She was passing the gym on a morning when something was audibly wrong. Not the usual strain and effort sounds, but something unsteady. A quality in the movement that her years of healthcare had taught her to read. And she stopped without thinking and pushed the door open. Minja was in the parallel bars, Dr. Park on the far side, and his left leg had given out mid-step, and he had caught himself on the bars, but the catch had torqued his shoulder, and he was now holding position with his face absolutely blank and his knuckles white and sweat on his jaw, and 3 inches from having gone down completely. Dr. Park started forward. "Stop," Min Jae said. To Park. Not to her. Nia walked to the near side of the bars. She didn't touch him. She stood close enough that if the bars gave way, she could respond, and she looked at him with the face she used for patients who needed her to be completely steady. Not soft. Not alarmed. Just present. "Weight's on your right hip," she said. "You're compensating. Drop the right shoulder 1/2 an inch." He looked at her. "1/2 an inch," she said. He adjusted. Microscopic. She watched his center of gravity shift. "Now the left leg," she said. "Not from the knee, from the hip socket." He tried. The leg moved. Not far, not perfectly, but it moved with intention rather than collapse. and he held it for 2 seconds, and then carefully redistributed and stood steady in the bars. The room was completely silent. Dr. Park looked at her with an expression she couldn't interpret. Professional surprise, maybe. Or something else. Min-jae said nothing for a long moment. His breathing was controlled. His face was back to its careful composure, the layers reapplied rapidly, but underneath, she had learned to see underneath. She could read the particular mixture of exhaustion and something else, something that in anyone else she would have called moved. "How did you know that?" he said. "6 years working in physical rehabilitation wards," she said. "I'm not a PT, but I've watched a lot of sessions." He absorbed this. "You never mentioned that. You never asked." Another silence. "You could sit in on the sessions," he said. It came out like a statement rather than a question, in the way he offered things, as facts he had decided rather than requests he was making. "As an observer, if you wanted." "If I wanted," she said. "I'm not asking for help," he said, very precisely. "I know," she said. "I'm not offering any." He looked at her for one more moment, nodded once, turned back to the bars. She stayed for the rest of the session. She was in his sessions every morning after that. She never touched him without instruction. She never spoke unless she saw something useful. And slowly, over days, over the specific increments that rehabilitation moves in when it moves at all, things began to shift. Small things. The left hip engagement. The redistribution of effort. The particular angle of the bars he'd been using that had been subtly wrong for weeks. He didn't thank her. She didn't require thanks. They had established a grammar between them that didn't need that word. What she did not account for was what the sessions cost her. She had told herself she could observe clinically. She had worked in healthcare long enough to believe she had separated the professional I from everything else. But there was something about watching Min-jae in those sessions. The sheer relentless refusal of him, the way he kept coming back to a body that was genuinely failing him and demanding more from it regardless. The complete absence of self-pity even in his worst moments. That got under her clinical distance and stayed there. She started dreaming about the sessions. Woke up twice with the image of his hands on the bars, knuckles white, jaw locked. She told herself she was processing work-adjacent stress. She told herself she was simply developing the sympathy that any person would develop for someone they watched suffer. She did not tell herself anything about the evenings in the sitting room or the way she had started listening for the sound of his chair in the hallway, the way you listened for something you expected. She was being very, very careful. Well, the charity gala was in the 7th week. Min-jae's organization hosted it annually, a high-visibility event that served multiple functions simultaneously, as events in his world always did. Politicians, corporate names, several people whose presence at a charity function was, Nia had come to understand, a form of communication directed at other people in the room rather than a genuine interest in the charitable cause. Sujin briefed her the night before with the thoroughness of a general preparing for a campaign. She wore a dark green dress that she had picked herself from the stylist's selection. Not the one she had been steered toward, which had been lovely and had no personality, but a darker one, more structured, that felt like armor in the way a good dress sometimes could. She put on Min-jae's mother's earrings without being asked. Min-jae saw them when she came downstairs. He said nothing, but something went through his eyes. Not the closing down shift. The other one. The gala was the largest room she had been in with him. Not 60 people, but several hundred, in a venue that occupied the entire ground floor of a building downtown. The security was dense and discreet, and she could feel it the way you could feel a current in water even when the surface looked still. She worked the room beside him. Better now than she had been on the first dinner, surer on her feet, with a clearer map of the ecosystem she was moving in. She knew which faces to hold attention for and which to move past quickly. She knew which questions were genuine and which were intelligence gathering. She had been in this world for 7 weeks, and she was learning its language. She was talking to a woman from the city's arts foundation, a conversation she was genuinely engaged in. The woman was sharp and funny, and the foundation's work was real. When she became aware of someone approaching from her left, she turned. The woman was tall, Korean, somewhere in her early 30s, with the particular grooming of someone for whom appearance had always been part of the arsenal. Her dress was perfectly chosen. Her posture communicated everything and gave nothing away. She looked at Nia with an expression that took Nia approximately 4 seconds to fully decode. Cognition, assessment, and underneath both of those, something colder, something with history in it. You must be Nia, the woman said. Her English was excellent. I'm Han Seo-yeon, an old friend of Min Jae's. The way she said old friend told Nia the full truth of it before the conversation went any further. Han Seo-yeon, Nia said calmly, extending her hand. I've heard the name. She hadn't, but she said it the way people said things in this world, as if all information was already available to her, and she was simply confirming its provenance. Seo-yeon shook her hand. Her grip was precise. Her eyes were doing the kind of reading that Nia recognized because she did it herself. Rapid, total, missing nothing. We should talk, Seo-yeon said, privately, before the evening gets any later. Nia smiled. Of course. The conversation happened in a small room off the main corridor, a library alcove with 2 chairs and the sound of the gala muffled behind the closed door. Seo-yeon sat with the practiced composure of a woman who had been sitting in rooms like this since she was old enough to attend events like this. Nia sat across from her and kept her hands loose in her lap and her face completely readable, which was its own form of strategy. I'm not here to cause problems, Seo-yeon began. Okay, Nia said. I am here because I think you deserve to know what kind of arrangement you walked into. I know what kind of arrangement I walked into. Do you? Seo-yeon's head tilted slightly. Do you know that Kang Min-jae's team began building a profile on you 11 months ago? Not 6 weeks, 11 months. Nia kept her face still. Do you know that Attorney Lim's firm has a division specifically designed to identify and evaluate candidates for exactly this kind of arrangement? That you were number 7 on a list of 12? That the selection criteria included not just financial vulnerability and caregiving motivation, but psychological profiles designed to predict how thoroughly a candidate would bond under the conditions of the estate? The muffled sound of the gala, a string quartet playing something elegant and purposeless. How do you know this? Nia said. Her voice was level. Because I sat across from those same attorneys 18 months ago when Min Jae's succession requirements were first being addressed. I was the first option considered. I refused. Something crossed Seo-yeon's face. Not triumph, not cruelty, but something more complicated. Something that looked, at its edges, like regret. The criteria they used after I declined, they refined them. What they wanted was someone who couldn't refuse. Someone whose circumstances made the word no functionally impossible. Nia's hands were still loose in her lap. She was aware of them with the precision of someone making sure they didn't move. There's more, Seo-yeon said. I figured. The man you've been sharing a house with for 7 weeks. The version you know. The rehabilitation. The careful gestures. The grandmother visits. She paused. Do you know what Min Jae was doing in the 3 years before the attack? The relationships. The women he moved through when he found them useful and discarded when they weren't. The business associate whose family was managed when loyalty became inconvenient. She reached into her clutch and set a flat card on the armrest between them. This is an attorney's contact, not mine, an independent party. Everything I've said is documented. If you want to see the file on yourself, the one they built before you were ever contacted, you can request it through him. Nia looked at the card, looked at it for a long time. Why? She said finally. Why are you doing this? Seo-yeon looked at her with the direct, uncomfortable honesty of someone who has made a decision and is executing it regardless of the cost. Because Min Jae he is not a simple person, and what happened to him in the attack changed him. I believe that. But what was built to bring you here was not changed by the attack. It was designed before the attack, and then refined after, and you are standing inside a structure that was constructed around your specific weaknesses, and I think you should know that before you... She stopped. Before I what? Nia said. Seo-yeon looked at her, really looked at her. Before it's too late to decide what you actually want. Nia stood up, picked up the card, held it between 2 fingers. Thank you for the conversation, she said. She walked out of the room. She walked back through the corridor toward the main gala floor, past the security she could feel in the walls, past the string quartet, and the crystal and the $100 flower arrangements. And she walked until she found a doorway that opened onto a small exterior terrace that was empty and cold and overlooked the city in the dark. She stood there and breathed. In through the nose, out through the mouth, the way she'd learned to breathe in difficult moments. The card was still in her fingers. She looked at it. 11 months, not 6 weeks. 11 months of building a file on her. 11 months of profiling her grief and her debt, and her grandmother's illness and her psychological architecture. The specific ways she was likely to respond, the specific conditions under which she would bond, the precise pressure points that would make no impossible. She thought about the coffee on the gym floor, the adjusted table, the gray coat, Gerald getting baseball fans visiting him once a week. The way Minjae's voice had sounded when he said it started as an analysis. Started, she thought, of course it started as analysis. Everything started as analysis. The question is what it became. And then she thought, but you don't actually know what it became, you only know what he showed you. And the entire point of the exercise was to make sure you'd see exactly what he wanted you to see. The cold was significant now, pressing through the green dress, and she didn't go back inside yet. She stood on the terrace and felt the cold and held the card and let herself have the full experience of what was happening in her chest. Not the managed version, not the professional distance version, but the actual version. The one that felt like the specific sickness of realizing that a thing you had let yourself believe was real had been engineered. She had been built to fall. The entire architecture of the last 7 weeks, the careful distances and the fractional openings and the sessions and the sitting room evenings, had been designed with the precision of a man who dealt in calculated outcomes. He had looked at her profile and understood, with the same thoroughness he applied to market projections, exactly how she would respond to each element. And she had responded exactly as projected. The door behind her opened. She heard the chair before she turned around. Minjae came onto the terrace. He looked at her face and something happened in a rapid sequence of readings, his expression going through several small adjustments before settling into careful stillness. You spoke to Seo Yan, he said. She turned to face him fully. She was very cold and very still, and her voice when it came was the flattest she had ever heard from herself. 11 months, she said. He didn't answer. The profile, the psychological assessment, the criteria designed to find someone whose circumstances made refusal impossible. She held up the card. 11 months, Minjae. His face was completely controlled. Who gave you? Does it matter? Not a question. A long silence. The city below them. The cold. No, he said finally. The bonding criteria, she said. Was that in the brief? How quickly the candidate would develop attachment under controlled conditions. His jaw tightened. Was it? She said. Yes, he said, quiet, absolute. She felt the word land the way a blow lands, not sharp, but with weight. The kind that takes a moment to fully register. Everything I did, she started. Nia. Everything I felt, she stopped, started again. Her voice was not breaking. She would not let it break here. Was any of it, was there a single moment in 7 weeks that wasn't part of the calculation? He looked at her for a long moment with an expression she had never seen on him. Not the careful control, not the fractional openings. Something stripped down to the foundation, something that had the quality of a man standing in the parallel bars with nothing between him and the full weight of his own position. The contract was calculated, he said. I know that. The investigation was calculated. I know. What came after? He stopped. What came after? She said, waiting. What came after was not something I calculated, he said. It was something I didn't know how to stop. She looked at him. She looked at him for a long time, reading the face she had spent 7 weeks learning to read, and what she saw was true. She knew it was true, the way she knew things that had come from years of watching people in the raw, unmanaged moments of their lives. It was true, and it didn't fix anything. That was the part that broke something open in her chest, standing there in the cold. That something could be true and still not fix the thing underneath it. She had been selected, she had been profiled, she had been placed in conditions specifically engineered to produce the feelings she was currently having, and the fact that he had then also, genuinely, unexpectedly, fallen. That was real, and it was also not enough, and she didn't know what to do with both of those things being simultaneously true. I need to go, she said. Nia, not forever, she said. Tonight. I need tonight. She walked past him. Back through the door, through the corridor, through the edge of the gala, where 100 people moved and talked and performed their elaborate social rituals. And she found Tamara by the far wall and said simply, quietly, I need to leave. And Tamara, who had known her since they were 20 years old, asked exactly 0 questions and had her coat in 30 seconds and her arm through Nia's in 40, and they were out the side door and into the cold night air before the cold air hit her face and she remembered how to breathe. Tamara didn't speak until they were in the car, and the driver had pulled away from the building and the gala's lights had disappeared behind them. Then she put her hand over Nia's and held it, and Nia looked out the window at the city moving past and said nothing for a very long time. "How bad?" Tamara said finally. "Bad enough," Nia said. "Do you want to talk about it?" "Not yet," Tamara nodded, kept her hand where it was. That was the particular quality of her friendship that Nia had relied on for 6 years. She knew how to be present without filling the space with herself, which was a rarer skill than most people understood. They drove. The city thinned and then thickened again, and then thinned back out into the roads that led to the estate. And the whole time Nia sat with the card in her fingers, and the cold of the terrace still in her bones, and the image of Min Jae's face, stripped to the foundation, the parallel bar's expression, the weight of his own position, cycling through her mind on a loop she couldn't interrupt. What came after was not something I calculated. It was something I didn't know how to stop. She pressed her knuckles against her mouth. Pressed hard. He had said it with his face completely open. She had looked at him, and it was true. She knew it was true. It still didn't fix the 11 months. It still didn't fix the profile, the psychological architecture, the bonding criteria, the precise engineering of conditions designed to produce attachment in a woman whose circumstances made resistance unlikely. You couldn't love your way backward through a structure like that. You couldn't feel your way out of a foundation that had been built underneath you without your knowledge. Or could you? She pressed her knuckles harder. Stop, she told herself. Think about this later. Be somewhere solid first. She slept 4 hours and woke at 5 with the particular flatness of someone whose body has processed shock overnight and is now presenting the bill. She lay in the dark of her suite, his mother's earrings still on the nightstand where she'd placed them, the green dress folded over the chair, the city's pre-dawn quiet pressing against the windows. And she felt the full weight of her situation with a clarity that only arrived, in her experience, when she stopped trying to manage it. She was in love with him. She said it to herself, in the dark, without softening it. She was in love with Kang Min Jae, who had selected her from a list of 12 candidates based on a psychological profile designed to predict her attachment patterns, who had arranged her circumstances with the same calculated precision he applied to financial acquisitions, who had also, and this was the part she couldn't dismiss, sat with her grandmother in a blue robe and said yes with his face open, who had stood at the altar on shaking legs because he refused to greet her from a position of weakness, who had spent 7 weeks becoming something she had not expected and could not now unknow. Both things were true, the engineering and the love, the manipulation and the man underneath it. She lay there and breathed and let both things be true without trying to resolve them, because she had lived long enough to know that the situations requiring the most from you were almost never clean. Then she got up, washed her face, put on clothes, and went downstairs. Minja was in the study. It was 6 in the morning, and he was in the study with the lights on and 2 empty coffee cups on the desk, and the posture of a man who had not slept. His jacket was gone. His collar was open. The tablet was dark, not in use, just sitting there, and he was looking at the window the way people looked at windows when they were looking at something that wasn't outside it. He heard her in the doorway and turned. They looked at each other. "Sit down," he said. Then, immediately, "You don't have to." She sat down, the same chair as the first meeting. She had sat in this chair for their first conversation, and everything had been transactional and bounded, and she had known the shape of it. She sat in it now with no idea what the shape was. "I'm not going to yell at you," she said. Something in his face shifted. "Okay." "I thought about it. The yelling. I decided it wasn't going to give me what I actually need." "What do you need?" he said. Not defensive, not bracing, just asking. "The truth," she said. "All of it. Not the version that manages my reaction. Not the version that optimizes for the outcome you want. The actual truth." He was quiet for a moment. Then he turned the chair slightly to face her more directly and put his hands on the armrests, and she watched him make the decision, watched it happen in his face, the layered control releasing by degrees like pressure coming out of a system. "The profile was built 11 months before contact," he said. "Yes. The selection criteria included financial vulnerability, caregiver motivation, and psychological indicators for secure bonding under high-stress conditions. You were chosen because every metric suggested you would adapt to this environment without breaking, that your circumstances gave you insufficient alternative options, and that your particular psychology, specifically your pattern of maintaining function under crisis, your loyalty to the people you consider family, your resistance to intimidation, made you an ideal candidate for the public requirements of this position. She listened to this with her hands folded in her lap and her face exactly as neutral as she could make it. You were also chosen, he continued, because the profile identified that you were unlikely to be bought, that the money was a means to an end for you, your grandmother, and not an end in itself, that you would not be compliant. His jaw worked slightly. I needed someone who would not simply perform. I needed someone real. And the bonding conditions, she said, the sitting room, the sessions, were those engineered. The sitting room was not designed, he said. You chose that room. The books you read were yours. The rhythm of those evenings was yours. And the sessions. The sessions, he stopped. I allowed you in because Dr. Park's approach had plateaued and your observation about my hip alignment was clinically correct. That was not calculated. That was desperation. She looked at him. What about after? After you knew it was working? A long pause. After I knew it was working, he said, and his voice dropped to a register she'd only heard from him once before, on the terrace last night. I should have told you. I chose not to because I was... He stopped again. Say it, she said. Afraid, he said. The word came out with the quality of something that had not been said out loud before. I was afraid that if you knew the full architecture of how you came to be here, you would leave. And by the time I understood that fear, I had already... He looked at his hands on the armrests. Back at her. I had already been unable to stop what was happening. The study was very quiet. Outside, the estate's grounds were lightening with dawn, the garden going from black to gray to the first pale green. The things in the past, she said. What Seo-Yan said. The people you moved through. The associate whose family was managed, he said, flat, not hiding from the word. Yes. Tell me, he told her. Not everything. There were things that were not his alone to expose. But enough. The 3 years before the attack. The specific carelessness of a man who had power and no accountability in relationships that were transactions he hadn't bothered to disguise. The decision that had been made about an associate's family when loyalty became inconvenient. A decision that he had authorized and that he could not take back and that he had been living with since before the attack had changed the architecture of everything else. She listened. She did not look away from him. When he finished, the room held the weight of it. Not comfortable, not resolved, just held. Why did the attack happen? She said. He met her eyes. Retaliation, he said. For the decision. It found me 9 months later. She absorbed this. So the paralysis is a consequence of a choice I made, he said. Yes, I am aware of that. The dawn was fully arriving now, the garden going green outside the window, and Nia sat in the chair and looked at the man across from her and thought about everything she knew about broken things, broken bodies, broken patients, broken systems, broken people, and what it took to stay functional inside the breakage, and what it cost. I'm not going to pretend the 11 months is fine, she said. I'm not asking you to. I'm not going to pretend the selection criteria doesn't make me feel like I was... She chose her word carefully. Acquired. You were, he said. In the beginning. And now. He looked at her with his face entirely unmanaged. Now you are the only person in my life who sees me when my hands lose the bar, he said. The only person who does not perform for me. The only person whose absence... He stopped. His jaw was tight. I have been in this chair for 6 months, and I have not been afraid of the chair. I have been furious at it, and exhausted by it, and humiliated by it. But last night, on the terrace, watching you walk away, that was the first time since the attack that I understood what fear actually was. Nia's hands were very still in her lap. I am not asking you to forgive the structure, he said. I am telling you what is true. You asked for the truth, and that is the complete truth. The contract was a calculation. My feelings for you are not. She stood up. He went very still. She walked to where he was and crouched down in front of the chair, so they were level, eye to eye, no elevation between them, and she looked at him from 18 inches away with her heart doing something loud and inconvenient in her chest. I'm going to need time, she said. I know. I'm going to be angry about this sometimes. Probably when you least expect it. I know, and I'm going to need you to never, not once, manage my reaction to protect your outcome. If I ask you something, you tell me the truth, even when the truth is the thing most likely to make me leave. He held her gaze without flinching. Yes. Okay, she said. She stood up, stepped back. The distance between them recalibrated. I'm going to my session, she said. Come when you're ready. She left him in the study with the dawn coming through the window and his hands still on the armrests and two empty coffee cups, and the first genuine thing he'd done in years, which was nothing, which was just sitting there, not calculating, not managing, just sitting in the consequence of the truth and letting it be what it was. The days after that had a different texture again. Not easy. Nothing was easy, and she had meant what she said about the anger, which arrived sometimes without warning, in the middle of a dinner or a session or a quiet evening, and when it arrived she didn't smooth it over or put it somewhere manageable. She let it be present and he absorbed it without retreating, which was, she noticed and filed, its own specific form of evidence. She called Tamara on day 3. I'm staying, she said. Tamara was quiet for a moment. Is that what you want or what you decided? Both, Nia said, which is the only time a decision is actually sound. You're so annoying when you're right, Tamara said. And then, are you okay? Eh? Getting there, Nia said. Ask me again in a month. She moved differently in the house after that. Less like a managed guest, more like a person who lived there and had decided to live there on her own terms. She rearranged things in her suite that had been positioned for display rather than use. She started cooking breakfast twice a week because she had always found cooking calming, and the estate's kitchen was extraordinary, and the chef was, after an initial period of professional indignation, willing to share the space. Minjae appeared in the kitchen doorway the first morning she was cooking and looked at the scene. Nia in old sweats, eggs in a pan, the kitchen in a state of mild, controlled chaos, with the expression of a man encountering a variable he had not projected for. Sit down, she said without looking up. It'll be ready in 10 minutes. He sat down. She made eggs and toast and cut fruit and poured coffee and put it all in front of him and sat down across from him and ate. And he looked at his plate for a moment with the specific expression of someone being given something they don't have a category for. And then he picked up his fork and ate too. And the kitchen was warm and the food was real and something settled between them that had been unsettled for weeks. It's good, he said. I know, she said. He almost smiled. She saw it at the corner of his mouth before he controlled it. She decided not to say anything about it, which was, she was learning, one of the better decisions she made regularly. The session 3 weeks after the gala was the one that changed things. She had been watching the progression with the particular attention of someone who understood bodies and their resistance and their occasional, improbable cooperation. The left hip engagement had been improving incrementally, so slowly that on any given day it was almost invisible, but Nia tracked it the way she tracked everything, in the accumulated record of small observations rather than dramatic single moments. On the morning of the 23rd day after the gala, Minjae was in the parallel bars and she was on the side she always stood on, and Dr. Park was making a note on his tablet, and Minjae pushed off the bar with his right hand and transferred his weight to his left hip and took a step. Not a supported step, not a compensated step. A step. It lasted 2 seconds, the left leg fully loaded and then released and the weight redistributed, and he was still upright. Dr. Park made a sound she'd never heard from him. Something involuntary. Minjae stood absolutely still in the bars, breathing. His face was turned slightly away from her, and she could see the line of his jaw and the movement in his throat and the white of his knuckles, and she could feel, from where she stood, the specific quality of a person who is holding very still, because if they move, they might break something they've been waiting a long time for. Again, she said, quietly. He turned his head and looked at her. Again, she said. He did it again. It was the beginning, not the end. Dr. Park was careful about that, and Nia was careful about that, and even Minjae, with his structural impatience, understood that a single step was a single step and not a verdict. But it was the beginning of a different phase, and the energy in the estate shifted with it, the way air pressure shifted before weather. Everyone could feel it without being able to name the precise source. I was harder to be around after that, in a specific way. The progress made him push harder, and the pushing sometimes exceeded what his body could sustain in a given day, and on the days when he pushed too far he came to dinner with pain, living in his jaw and his shoulders, and he was short in the way that people in pain were short. Not cruel, but compressed, every unnecessary word cut. She learned the difference between the productive compression and the days it tipped into something sharper, and on the days it tipped, she simply put his medication on the table beside his water glass and said nothing about it. And sometimes he took it, and sometimes he didn't, and she didn't argue either way. "You're not my nurse," he said one evening, when she had set the medication down and he had looked at it for a full minute without touching it. "I know," she said, then stop. "I'm not doing anything," she said. "The pill's on the table. You can take it or not. It's your business." She turned a page in her book. "I just noticed you're eating with your left hand because your right shoulder is compensating for something it shouldn't have to compensate for, and that's going to set back the hip work if you don't address the muscle tension. But that's between you and Dr. Park." A silence. He picked up the pill, swallowed it with his water. She turned another page. "You're insufferable," he said. "You said that in a different context once," she said, "about yourself." "Did I?" "At the very beginning, I asked what was wrong with you, and you said your prognosis was disputed. And then I asked what your body said, and you said it said things you found inconvenient to repeat." He was quiet. "Your body's saying different things now," she said. He looked at her across the sitting room. The lamplight. The books. The two of them in the room that had become theirs without being designed as such. "Yes," he said. "It is." She looked back at her book. The words on the page didn't quite reach her for a moment. She waited until they did. The crisis came without warning on a Tuesday morning 6 weeks after the gala, the way crises always came, in the middle of an ordinary sequence of hours, as if time had simply decided to collect. She was in the session, her usual position, watching Min-jae work through the bar sequence that Dr. Park had extended based on the recent progress, when Park's phone vibrated on the equipment table. Park glanced at it. His face changed. "Excuse me," Park said, and left. She didn't think much of it. Sessions were interrupted occasionally. Min-jae continued working. She watched the left hip. Better today, cleaner engagement, the muscle memory. Beginning to build what the injury had dismantled. He was in the section of the bar sequence that required the transfer, and she was tracking his right shoulder for the compensation pattern when Soo-jin appeared in the gym doorway. Soo-jin's face was controlled. Fully controlled. That was what told Nia before the words did, because in 7 weeks she had never seen Soo-jin's face fully controlled at 6:30 in the morning. "Miss Monroe," Soo-jin said, "you need to come with me." Something went cold in Nia's chest. "What happened?" she said. "Your grandmother was taken to intensive care this morning at 4 a.m. Crescent General called the estate number. There was a complication with—" Nia was already moving. She heard Min-jae's voice behind her saying something to Soo-jin, sharp and immediate, operational, the voice he used when he was activating resources rather than having a conversation. She didn't hear the specific words. She was already in the corridor, already calculating the 90-minute drive, already running the clinical numbers in her head. ICU admission at 4, it's now 6:30, 2.5 hours, dialysis complication or cardiac event. She's 81. 81 with kidney disease, and the SUV was already at the front of the estate when she reached the main doors. 2 security detail already in the vehicle. The driver already running. She got in. The door closed. The estate's gates opened before they reached them. She sat in the back seat and pressed both hands flat against her thighs and breathed, and did not think about the worst thing, because thinking about the worst thing had never once in her life helped her move through it faster or better, and she needed to move. The phone in her hand buzzed. "Min-jae, I'm coming." She stared at the text for a moment. 2 words. No question in it. Not asking whether he should. Not offering and waiting for permission, just stating a fact about his intention. She typed back, "You don't have to." His response came in 4 seconds. "I know." She put the phone in her pocket and looked out the window at the road moving under them and held herself together with both hands, metaphorically and literally, all the way to the city. Crescent General at 7 in the morning had the particular quality of a place that had been running through the night and was shifting gears into the day without stopping. She knew every corridor of this building. She had walked these floors for 6 years. She had held hands in these rooms and made difficult calls from this building's family consultation areas, and knew, with the intimate knowledge of someone who had worked inside a system until its rhythms were hers, what each sound and each face meant. The ICU charge nurse was a woman named Dolores, who had been on that floor for 16 years and had, in Nia's experience, 3 facial expressions: fine, managing, and not good. When Nia came through the ICU doors and Dolores turned from the central station, what Nia saw was managing, which was not fine but was also not the third one, and she let out half a breath. BP dropped in the night, Dolores said, already moving, already briefing with the efficiency of the experienced. They think a small clot caught it before it progressed. She's on anticoagulants, stable as of 20 minutes ago. Can I go in? 2 minutes, doctor's in there now. Nia stood outside the ICU bay and pressed her palm flat against the wall beside the door and breathed. The corridor smelled like every hospital corridor, antiseptic and recycled air, and she had spent a third of her adult life in that smell. But right now it was the smell of Bet lying on the other side of a glass partition connected to equipment, which was different from the professional version of it entirely. The doctor came out, young, tired, competent looking. He briefed her in the direct language she had requested of every physician she'd ever dealt with in this building. Facts, timeline, probability assessments, no softening. She listened and nodded and asked 3 questions and absorbed the answers. She's asking for you, he said. She went in. Grandma Bet looked smaller than the last time. That was the thing that hit her first. The way illness had a way of reducing the physical frame while doing nothing to the interior, so that the person looking out of the face was the same person, fully present, fully themselves, but housed in something that had been worn down by the work of keeping them alive. Bet's eyes, when she found Nia in the doorway, were completely sharp. You drove fast, Bet said. I always drive fast, Nia said. She pulled the chair close and sat and took her grandmother's hand in both of hers. I told them not to call at that hour, Bet said, and I'm very glad they ignored you. Bet made the exhale sound. Her grip on Nia's hand was not as strong as usual. I had a dream, she said, in the night, before everything. Grandma, let me say it. Bet looked at her with the full focus of those 81 years. I dreamed about your mother. She was just standing in a garden somewhere, smiling. A pause. She looked the way she looked when she was happy. You remember that? Nia's throat tightened. I remember. She said. Bet stopped. Her eyes went somewhere interior for a moment, then came back. She said she's not alone anymore. Just that. She's not alone. The ICU bay was quiet. Equipment sounds. The window with its hospital light. Nia held her grandmother's hand and did not trust herself to speak for a long moment. When she could, go back to sleep, Grandma. I'm not tired. You almost had a clot. I know. I was there. But Bet's eyelids were already heavy, her grip already softening toward sleep. Is he here? She said, as her eyes closed. Your man. Nia looked at the doorway. Min Jae was there. She didn't know when he'd arrived. He'd made the 90-minute drive in something less than that, clearly, and he was in yesterday's event clothes with his collar open and his face carrying the unmanaged quality of a person who had driven 90 minutes in a state of focused urgency and not had time to reassemble the layers. He looked at her. His eyes went to Bet's sleeping face and then back to her, and the question in them was purely human. No strategy in it, no management. Just, is she okay? Nia nodded once. Something released in his face. She turned back to her grandmother, held her hand while she slept, felt Min Jae take a position just outside the bay door, close enough to be there, far enough to give her the room, and stay there, without moving, without his phone, without anything to do except be present in the way that people were present when presence was the only thing being asked for. An hour passed. 2. Bet's vitals steadied further. The morning shift nurses came through with the efficiency of people who had seen this room hold worse and hold it fine. Nia finally stepped out of the bay and stood in the corridor and looked at the wall for a moment and let herself feel, completely and without managing it, the specific relief of a catastrophe that had been close and had pulled back. It moved through her like a wave, and she let it pass. Minja was 2 feet away, not touching her, just there. Thank you, she said. I know what you're going to say. She looked at him. It's within the parameters of the arrangement. I know. But I'm going to thank you anyway because she matters to me and you being here matters to me and I am done pretending it doesn't. He looked at her for a moment with that open face. Then he said quietly, "She's going to be all right." "I know. The transplant team. I spoke to the director when I arrived. The donor match process has been reactivated at priority status. He confirmed there are 2 potential matches currently in evaluation." She stared at him. "You had time to arrange that while—" "It took 4 minutes," he said, from the car. She looked at him for a long, full moment. The corridor, the hospital light. The man in yesterday's clothes who had driven 90 minutes at speed and spent 2 hours outside an ICU bay without complaint, and in 4 minutes from a moving vehicle had done the thing she had been trying to accomplish for 2 years. "Min Jae," she said. "I need you to know something." He waited. "I've been angry," she said, "about the 11 months, about the profile, about the engineering of it. And I'm not finished being angry about it. I meant what I said, it's going to come back sometimes." "I know, but I also need you to know—" She stopped, breathed. Let the thing that had been building since the first week in the sitting room, since the gray coat and the adjusted table and the sessions and the terrace and the dawn in the study, let it be what it was in her chest without managing it or translating it or putting it into the practical column. "I know what this is," she said, "for me. I know what it is, and I'm not afraid of it, and I'm done acting like I don't know." He was very still. The hospital corridor moved around them, nurses and carts, and the ordinary machinery of people keeping each other alive. And in the middle of it, Min Jae looked at her with his face completely open and said, in the quietest voice she had heard from him, "Say it." She looked at him. The man who had selected her from a list and engineered her circumstances and stood on shaking legs at an altar and sat with her grandmother in a blue robe and driven 90 minutes at speed because she needed him to. The man she had spent 3 months learning and had not finished learning and was not going to finish learning and didn't want to. "I love you," she said, flat, direct, no performance in it, the way she said true things. He closed his eyes. Just for a second. When he opened them, they were carrying something she had never seen in them before. Not the careful control, not the fractional opening, but something complete. Something that had stopped being managed. "I loved you before I knew how to call it that," he said. "Before the wedding, before the sitting room, I watched you walk down that aisle alone, and I understood that every calculation I had ever made in my life had been preparation for making the single worst one, bringing you into this world without telling you what you were walking into, and that I was going to spend however long it took earning the right to have you look at me the way you looked at me when I stood up." Nia's jaw was tight. Her eyes were doing the thing she didn't let happen in professional settings. She let it happen. "We're in a hospital corridor," she said. "I know." "This is not—" "I know," he said. "I don't care." She pressed her lips together, looked at the ceiling for a moment, looked back at him. "Bet's going to wake up in about 40 minutes, she said. "I'll be here. She's going to want to talk to you." "I know. She's going to ask you things directly, and you're going to have to answer them." "I know that too." Nia looked at him for one more moment with the full weight of everything. The 11 months, and the contract, and the ivory dress, and the standing, and the terrace, and the dawn in the study, and this corridor right now, and the 2 potential kidney matches in evaluation, and the sitting room, and the coffee on the gym floor, and all of it, every piece of it, laid out and weighed and accounted for. "Okay," she said. He reached out and took her hand. Not ceremonially, not instrumentally, just took it, the way she had taken his arm at the altar. Steady, present, without agenda. She let him hold it. Down the hall, behind the glass. Grandma Bet slept with her sharp eyes closed and her blue hospital robe and her grip relaxed for the first time in months. In a room where the equipment said she was stable and the transplant list had started moving and her granddaughter was standing in a corridor 20 feet away. Finally, not handling it alone. She stood in that corridor with his hand around hers and the hospital doing its ordinary work around them and let herself be held, which was the hardest thing she had done in the entire 3 months. Harder than the contract and the ceremony and the terrace and the dawn in the study combined, because she had been handling things alone since she was 9 years old, and the habit of it was structural, load-bearing, built into the architecture of who she was. And letting someone else take part of the weight felt like removing a beam and trusting that the building would still stand. It stood. She breathed. He held her hand. The corridor moved around them, and Grandma Bet slept behind the glass. And somewhere in a medical office, a transplant coordinator was pulling 2 files marked priority, and the morning was doing what mornings did, which was continuing regardless. She was going to be all right. They were going to have to figure out what that meant. Bet woke 43 minutes later, which was 2 minutes longer than Nia had projected, and the first thing she did when her eyes opened and found Nia in the chair beside her was look past Nia to the doorway where Minjae was standing. "You came," Bet said. Not surprised, just confirming. "Yes," he said. 90 minutes is a long drive at that hour. Less this morning. Bet's sharp eyes moved between them, settled on their hands, which were no longer joined. Nia had let go when she came back into the bay, a residual habit of keeping things managed in clinical spaces, but which were close on the bedrail in a way that communicated something regardless. Bet said. The sound she made for things confirmed. "Don't," Nia said. "I didn't say anything." "You were about to." "I was going to say I'm thirsty," Bet said, with the specific dignity of a woman who had been making this particular move since before Nia could walk. "Is anyone going to get me water, or are you both going to stand there looking at each other?" She stayed at the hospital through the afternoon. Minjae stayed with her, which she had not asked him to, and which he had not announced. He had simply not left, repositioning himself as needed, present in the way he had been outside the ICU bay, without agenda or performance. He took 2 calls from his office in the family waiting area, both brief, both handled with the compressed efficiency of a man who is managing his professional obligations in the smallest possible footprint so that something else could have the larger part of the space. She noticed. She was always going to notice. That was who she was. By late afternoon, Bet had been moved from the ICU to a step-down unit. A good sign, the charge nurse confirmed. Stability achieved, monitoring continued, and the transplant coordinator had come by to discuss the 2 potential matches with a measured optimism that was Nia understood from experience, the most genuine kind of optimism those conversations ever carried. When the coordinator left, Bet looked at Minjae, who had been present for the briefing. "You did that," she said. Not accusing, just identifying. "The match process had stalled," he said. "I moved it." "You moved it," Betty repeated slowly. She looked at him for a long moment with the full 81 years of her attention. "You know, a man can do a lot of things for a woman and have them not mean much. Write checks, open doors. None of that costs him anything." Her hand moved on the sheet. "But coming when it matters, being in the room when it's hard, that's the thing that costs. That's how you know." Minjae looked at her. His face was not managed. "I know," he said. "Do you love her?" Bet said. "Grandma?" Nia started. "I'm not asking you," Bet said without looking at her. Minjae held Bet's gaze without hesitation. "Yes," he said. "You going to keep her safe?" "Yes." "From the world you operate in." A pause. The honest pause. "I'm going to keep her as safe as the world I operate in permits," he said. "I won't make promises I can't guarantee, but I will not stop trying." Bet looked at him for another long moment. Then she nodded once, the way she nodded when she had decided something and it was done. "Okay," she said. She turned back to Nia. "Stop hovering, baby. Go eat something. You haven't eaten since this morning." "I'm fine." "You've been saying that since you were 9 years old, and it's never once been completely true." Bet looked at Minjae. "Take her to eat. She won't go alone." "I can hear you both," Nia said. "Good," Bet said. "Then you heard me say, go eat." They found a cafeteria on the 3rd floor that was empty at 6 in the evening, except for 2 nurses on break and a tired-looking resident staring into a cup of coffee like it had personally wronged him. Nia got soup and a roll, and Minjae got coffee, and they sat at a table by the window overlooking the parking structure and the slice of city visible beyond it. She ate. He watched her eat, which she would have found irritating 3 months ago, and found now simply true. He watched people he cared about, the way he watched everything, with full attention and no pretense of not doing it. "She's going to be okay," he said. "I know." She broke the roll. "I've been telling myself that all day. It doesn't stop the—" She stopped. "The fear," he said. "Yeah. No," he said. "It doesn't." He turned his coffee cup in his hands, a gesture she recognized, the one he made when he was thinking rather than formulating. "I've been afraid every day for 6 months," he said, "since the attack. Not of the chair, not of the prognosis. Afraid that I had lost, that the person I was becoming before the attack, the version of me making those decisions, doing those things, that was all I was going to get to be." That the injury was the end of the transformation rather than the... He stopped. The beginning of it, she said. He looked at her. I know, she said. I've been watching it. He was quiet for a moment. I needed you to see it, he said. Even when I didn't say that. Even when I was telling you not to watch. I know that too. The cafeteria hummed with its institutional sounds. The two nurses laughed about something at their table. The resident turned a page in a chart. The 6-month mark is in 3 weeks, Nia said. He was still. The contract, she said. The original term. I know when it is. I've been thinking about it. She kept her voice level, informational, the way she talked about things that mattered too much to let inflection carry. I've been thinking about what happens when the term ends, and we're both on the other side of it, and the original structure dissolves and what's left is just us, whatever that is. What have you been thinking? He said. That it scares me, she said. Not in the way the contract scared me at the beginning. Different. The contract was terrifying because I didn't know what I was walking into. This is terrifying because I do know. I know exactly who you are, and what your world is, and what it costs the people near you. And I know who I am and what I need and where those things are going to conflict, and I'm choosing it anyway. And choosing something fully aware of the cost it's a different kind of frightening. I was listening with his full attention, the way he listened when he had decided that nothing he was thinking was more important than what was being said to him. I'm going to finish nursing school, she said. I've been doing the coursework online through all of this. I'm 14 months from my RN. I'm going to finish it. I know, I've watched you study, and I'm going to keep working. Not at Crescent General, necessarily, but I'm going to keep working. That's not negotiable. I need to be useful in the way I know how to be useful, and I need it to be mine. I would never ask you to stop, he said. I know, I'm telling you anyway, because I need it said. He nodded. And I'm going to be angry sometimes, she said. About the 11 months. About the structure. I meant it when I said it comes back. It's going to come back for a while, I know. And when it does, you don't get to manage it or optimize your response to minimize the fallout. You sit in it with me. Yes, he said. No hesitation. She looked at him across the cafeteria table in the hospital light, which was the least flattering light in any building, which stripped everything down to its actual state, which revealed what remained when all the deliberate framing was removed. He looked tired and present and completely himself. The man under the control, the man in the parallel bars, the man who had driven 90 minutes at speed because she had needed him to, the man who was going to keep being more complicated than she could fully map and was not going to stop being worth the mapping. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. She finished her soup. He drank his coffee. Outside the window, the city was going into its evening, lights coming on in sequence the way they did, the ordinary machinery of a million lives continuing without awareness of the particular small table in this particular cafeteria, where two people who had come together as a transaction were deciding, with full information and full cost accounted for, to stay. The 6-month mark passed on a Thursday. No one marked it formally. There was no document, no attorney's call, no official dissolution of terms. Attorney Lim had sent a brief communication 2 weeks prior confirming that the contracted obligations had been fulfilled on all sides. Bet's treatment funded, Nia's account holding the agreed sum, all formal requirements met. Nia had read it once, filed it, and not mentioned it at breakfast. The Thursday came and went like other Thursdays. She had a session with Min Jae at 6:30 in which he walked 7 steps in the parallel bars without the right hand leaving the bar at all, which was the best session in 2 months, and which Dr. Park documented with the specific professional restraint of a man who was very pleased and was trained not to show it. She had a hospital shift at noon. She studied for 2 hours in the estate's sitting room after dinner. She and Min Jae read in comfortable parallel silence until 10, when she said goodnight and went upstairs. He came to her door an hour later. She had been expecting it, not because she had calculated it, but because she had come to know his rhythms the way she knew the estate's sounds, the particular quiet that preceded the things he needed to say, the timing of his movements when something was sitting with him. She opened the door before he knocked. He looked at her with a slight adjustment in his expression that was his version of being caught off guard. "Come in," she said. He came in. She had her reading lamp on and the window open a crack, the night air moving the curtain slightly. He positioned by the window and looked out at the garden and the fountain and the old trees, which were beginning to lose their leaves in the late autumn, going gold and amber and the dark red that meant the season was turning. It expired today, he said. I know. The arrangement. I know, Minjae. He turned from the window. I want to ask you something. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked at him. Ask. He looked at her for a long moment with his face in its unmanaged state. The one she had come to understand was reserved for her and for Bet and for the gym and for nowhere else. Stay, he said. Not because of the arrangement, not because of the contract or the estate or any structure that was built before you knew what you were walking into. Stay because you want to. I'm already staying, she said. I know, I wanted to ask anyway. A pause. I wanted you to choose it with the question asked directly rather than by default. She looked at him. The window. The curtain moving. The amber trees in the dark garden. I'm staying, she said. I'm staying because I want to. Because you asked directly. He breathed out. She heard it. The release of it. The length of it. The weight that it was carrying, and sat down. Come sit down, she said. You've been standing for 40 minutes today total, and your hip is going to lock overnight if you don't. I know what my hip is going to do, he said. Then sit down. He sat in the chair near the window, and she pulled her knees up on the bed, and they were in the room together. The way they were in the sitting room, parallel and easy. And the night moved around them, and the curtain moved, and somewhere below the fountain ran, and neither of them spoke for a while, and that was its own complete thing, the silence they had built. The one that was no longer the absence of words, but the presence of everything that didn't need them. Grandma Bet received her kidney transplant 11 weeks after the ICU crisis. The match was confirmed on a Wednesday morning, and the call came to Nia's phone at 7:15 while she was in the session, and she left the session without explanation and stood in the corridor and heard the coordinator say the words and held the phone against her ear and felt the specific quality of relief that only came after a very long time of being afraid. Not sharp, not dramatic, but slow and deep. The way cold left a room that had been closed all winter when the window was finally opened. She called Minji from the corridor. He picked up on the second ring. They have a match, she said. He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was in the register she had come to understand as his genuine register. Not the operational voice, not the managing voice, but the one that existed underneath all of it. When? He said. This week. Thursday or Friday, depending on the surgical team's schedule. I'll make the schedule work, he said, for Thursday. She pressed her back against the wall and looked at the ceiling. You don't have to... Nia. I know, she said. I know. Thursday. The surgery was 7 hours. Nia spent them in the surgical waiting room with Tamara on one side and Minjae on the other, which was not a configuration she had imagined, and which was, she thought somewhere in the 4th hour, exactly right. Tamara kept up a steady low commentary on everything except what was happening in the operating room, which was her particular gift, the gift of filling difficult time with the warm noise of ordinary life. Minja was quiet, in the way he was always quiet, present, fully present, with his phone face down on the chair beside him and his attention in the room. At the 6-hour mark, she put her head on his shoulder. He didn't say anything. He put his hand over hers on the armrest and kept it there. Tamara looked at them from the other side and said nothing, which was its own kind of statement. The surgeon came out at the 7-hour mark with the face that Nia had learned to read in years of watching surgeons emerge from difficult rooms, and what she saw before he spoke was the face of someone who had done a hard thing and had it go the right way. She did beautifully, he said. Tamara made a sound. Nia closed her eyes for 3 seconds. When she opened them, Minjae was looking at her with his hand still over hers, and his face carrying everything. Go, he said, quietly. She went, oh. Bet in recovery looked smaller and larger at the same time. Smaller because the surgery had taken something physical from her, the way every serious medical event did, and larger because something in her face was different. Something that had been tight for a long time was not tight. The body's fear of its own ending had a physical signature that Nia had learned to read in other patients, and had never let herself read in Bet, and the absence of it now was so complete and so sudden that she stood in the recovery room doorway for a moment, just identifying it before she moved. She sat beside the bed and took her grandmother's hand. Bet opened her eyes, slow, heavy with anesthesia, but when they found Nia they were sharp even through the haze. How'd I do? Bet said. Her voice was rough. Beautifully, Nia said. She managed it for exactly 1 second before her voice did something she couldn't control, and she stopped and pressed her free hand against her mouth and breathed. Bet's grip tightened. Hey, she said. Hey, baby, I'm here. I know, Nia said. I know you are. Stop that, Bet said, which was what she said when Nia cried, and which she had been saying since Nia was 9 years old and had not changed its effect once in 17 years, which was to make Nia laugh through it, which she did, briefly, before pressing the back of her hand against her eyes and pulling herself back together. Is he outside? Bet said. Waiting room. Go get him, Bet said. Grandma, you just came out of... Go get him, Bet said again, with the particular tone that meant the conversation was over. Nia got him. Minji came into the recovery room and positioned beside Nia at the bed, and Bet looked at him for a long moment with her post-surgical eyes, and her grip still holding Nia's hand, and said, without any preamble, Take care of my girl. Yes, he said. I'm not asking if you will, Bet said. I'm telling you to. Yes, he said again. And then, very simply, with something in his voice that Nia had not heard before, something that sounded like the specific warmth of a man who had spent a long time without the word, I will. Bet nodded, closed her eyes. Good, she said. And within 3 minutes she was asleep, which was what 7 hours of surgery and a body finally beginning to heal asked for. And the monitors said what they needed to say, and the room held what it was holding. 3 months after the transplant, Nia sat the final examination for her nursing degree. She sat it on a Tuesday morning in a testing center downtown, in a room with 40 other candidates and the particular dense silence of concentrated effort. And she worked through the exam with the focus she had carried her entire adult life, the focus that had gotten her through double shifts and coding patients, and a contract marriage and an ICU waiting room and 7 hours of surgical waiting, and the specific sustained endurance of a person who had decided a long time ago that she was going to keep moving regardless. She finished with 11 minutes remaining. She checked her work once. Submitted. She sat in the parking lot afterward and called Min-jae. I finished, she said. How do you feel? He said. Like I've been carrying something for years and I just put it down. A pause. Is that good? Yeah, she said. It's good. Come home, he said. She sat for one more moment in the parking lot, with the phone in her hand and the November cold through the car window, and the particular quality of a day that had been a long time arriving. Then she started the car. She drove the 90 minutes back to the estate with the heat running and the radio on low, and her mind doing the particular quiet thing it did when a major thing had been accomplished, and the next thing hadn't yet made itself known. The trees along the private drive had finished losing their leaves, and the branches were bare and angular against the gray sky, and the estate emerged from behind them the way it always did, certain, severe, sure of itself. But it was home now. That was the thing she had not expected in the beginning and could not now imagine being otherwise. The stone and the tall windows and the garden with the fountain that ran even in winter, and the kitchen and the sitting room with its worn-in chairs and its lamplight evenings. It was home, in the way that places became home not through intention but through accumulation, through the layered deposit of enough ordinary mornings and difficult nights that the space started to carry the shape of your life. Minja was in the garden when she came through the side entrance. He was in the chair by the path that led to the fountain, coat on, watching the bare trees, and he heard her on the path and turned. She walked toward him, the gravel under her feet, the cold air, the fountain's sound which she had stopped noticing months ago and noticed again now the way you notice things when you were paying a particular kind of attention. The results aren't for 2 weeks, she said. You passed, he said. You don't know that. I know you, he said. She stopped in front of him, looked at him in the gray afternoon light, which was, like hospital light, unforgiving and accurate. It showed what was actually there, not what the staging suggested. What it showed was a man who was changed from the man she had first walked into the study to meet, changed not by the recovery, though the recovery continued steadily, the walking now real and regular and extending, but by the particular transformation of a person who had been given, unexpectedly and against his own calculations, the thing that had been missing from the architecture of his life. He reached into his coat pocket. She went still. He took out a ring, small, simple, white gold set with something that caught the thin November light and held it. His mother's stone, she recognized it, the same quality as the earrings she had been wearing since the wedding. I want to ask you something, he said. Minjae, let me say it. She pressed her lips together, nodded. He looked at her with his face completely open, the face she had seen for the first time in a gym doorway at 6:30 in the morning and had been learning ever since. I've thought about how to do this for 3 months, he said. I've considered the setting and the timing and the framing, and every time I ran the variables, the answer came back the same. There's no version of this that I can engineer into what I want it to be. There's no structure that makes it right except the true one, she breathed. So the true one, he said. I love you. Not the person I selected from a profile and not the person who adapted to my conditions. The person you actually are, which is the most difficult and the most real person I have ever been in a room with. And I would like to spend the rest of my life being in rooms with you. Being held to account by you. Being seen by you when I lose my grip on the bar. I would like to do that officially and permanently, and with full knowledge of every cost on both sides, which we both know better than anyone. He held the ring up. The stone caught the light again. Nia Monroe, he said, will you marry me? Not because of a contract, not because of a succession requirement, because you want to. The garden was very quiet. The bare trees, the fountain, the cold November air that smelled like turned earth in coming winter. She looked at the ring, at his face, at the man who had come to her through the worst possible door and had turned out to be, on the other side of everything, the right person. She thought about the 3-column list she had written at a kitchen table in a small apartment, the one with pro and con and questions. She thought about Bet's hand gripping hers in a hospital bed with swollen knuckles and everything. She thought about ivory silk and white gold and a man standing on shaking legs because he refused to greet her from a position of weakness, and a gray coat on a cold morning, and coffee on a gym floor, and the sitting room and its lamp, and the parallel evolution of 2 people who had come to a room for separate reasons and ended up in the same one. She thought, there is no version of the calculation that accounts for this. And that's exactly right. Right. Yes, she said. He put the ring on her finger. His hands were steady. Hers were not, quite, and she did not care. She crouched in front of him the way she had done in the study in the early weeks, eye level, no elevation between them, and she put her hand on his jaw and looked at him from close enough that she could see everything. Every year of it, every cost, everything he had been and was becoming. And she kissed him for the first time, which was not the first time in the legal record, but was the first time that was only theirs, unwitnessed and unperformed and entirely real. The November garden held them. The fountain ran. The bare branches overhead made their angular shapes against the gray sky, and the stone estate stood at the end of the drive the way it always had, certain and severe, and now for 2 people who had arrived at each other through the longest and most unlikely road, utterly, completely home. Bet Monroe was discharged from post-surgical monitoring in the early spring. She came to the estate for the first time on a Saturday in March, when the garden was beginning to do what gardens did after long winters, slowly, stubbornly, pushing green back through the cold, hardened ground. Minji had the east garden path cleared and widened for her walker, which he had arranged without being asked, and which Bet noticed immediately and said nothing about, which was her version of being moved. Nia walked beside her grandmother through the garden that afternoon, both of them in coats, the thin spring sunlight doing its tentative best, and Bet moved slowly and looked at everything with her sharp old eyes, the fountain, the hedges, the bare patches of beds beginning to show the first tentative color. It's a good house, Bet said. It's a big house, Nia said. Big isn't the same as good. Bet stopped by the fountain and looked at it, looked at Nia. You're different, she said. Am I? You're less, she considered, less braced, like you've been waiting for the next bad thing for so long that you forgot to notice when it stopped coming for a while. Nia looked at the fountain. The water moved in its constant loop, and the spring light hit it and broke it into pieces and reassembled it, over and over, the way water always did. I'm learning, she said. That's all any of us do, Bet said. Learn and keep moving. She started walking again, slow and deliberate and entirely herself. Where's he? Inside, he said he'd give us the walk. Consider it. Bet's tone was the tone of someone confirming a verdict they had already returned. You know what I like about him? What? He doesn't perform. Bet turned slightly on the path, her walker finding the gravel, her blue coat and her sharp eyes, and 81 years of watching people. Everybody performs. Every man I ever met performed one thing or another. He just Says what's true and does what he means to do. That's rare. Nia felt the thing behind her eyes that she no longer always successfully managed. Yeah, she said, it is. You got that from your mother, Bet said. Knowing the real thing when you see it, she always knew. She paused on the path and looked at the garden and looked at Nia. She'd be proud of you, baby. Not because of this, a gesture that took in the estate, the fountain, the ring on Nia's hand. Because of how you got here. Because you didn't stop moving when it got hard, and you didn't trade who you are for what you needed, and you didn't close yourself off when you had every reason to. Bet's hand found Nia's arm on the walker's handle and gripped it. That's not easy. That's everything. Nia covered her grandmother's hand with hers, held it on the walker between them. The spring garden moved around them in its slow resurrection, and the fountain ran and the estate stood at the end of the path, and through the window of the sitting room, she could see, at this distance, the shape of Minjae at the desk. Working, always working, but in a house that was no longer just a fortress. In a life that was no longer just a structure. She stood in the garden with her grandmother's hand in hers and let herself have it. The whole of it. The complexity and the cost and the love and the imperfection of it, without managing it or translating it into something more manageable. Just stood in it. The way you stood in sunlight when you had been inside for a long time. Not performing gratitude, just having it. This was not the story she had planned when she opened an envelope with no return address at a kitchen table $30 away from an overdraft. It was not the story she had written in 3 columns on a piece of paper at midnight, pro and con and questions. It was not the story anyone would have written from the outside, looking at the components, the contract, the chair, the criminal empire, the debt, the grandmother, the profile built over 11 months from a woman's specific vulnerabilities. But that was the thing about the stories that changed you. They never came through the door you left open. They came through the one you thought was closed. And what made them matter, what made them worth the cost of telling, was not that the people in them were made whole or made simple or made easy by what happened to them. It was that they kept moving, that they chose, with full information and full awareness of the price, to keep moving toward each other anyway. That they built something in the space between their broken places, not in spite of the breaking, but from it. From the specific material of 2 people who had lost enough to understand what things were actually worth. Kang Min-jae had built his life on calculated outcomes. He had controlled every variable he could reach and managed every risk he could quantify, and still ended up, at 32, in a wheelchair, in a house full of people performing their loyalty, with the most powerful version of a loan that money and power could construct. Nia Monroe had built her life on surviving, on keeping the next person alive, and the next, and the one after that, and never stopping long enough to ask what she needed or who was keeping her. They had come at each other through the worst possible structure. And they had built something real inside it anyway. Something that had no contract clause and no succession requirement and no term limit and no exit strategy. Something that was, in the end, simply this. 2 people in a garden in early spring, one of them at a window, one of them on a path. Both of them finally, facing the same direction. The fountain ran. The bare branches held their new buds. Bet Monroe stood in the thin March sunlight with her walker and her blue coat and her 81 years of accumulated witness and said nothing more, because she was a woman who knew when everything that needed to be said had been said. And Nia Monroe stood beside her and looked at the window and the man in it and thought, for the first time in as long as she could remember, not about what came next or what it would cost or whether she could handle it alone. She just looked and was glad.